This presentation is on how depression is associated with bacterial sexually transmitted infections, or STIs, among gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men. These are my conflicts of interest disclosures. Among gay and bisexual men, or GBM, depression is consistently associated with stimulant use and HIV risk behavior. However, there is a lack of data on how depression may be associated with outcomes related to bacterial STIs among gay and bisexual men. The lack of data limit our ability to understand the mechanisms by which depression is associated with sexual health. One question we had is stimulant use one of the reasons that depression, a mental health variable, might be associated with STIs? Our data come from the ENGAGE cohort study. ENGAGE is a mixed method cohort study conducted in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. Our data were collected using respondent-driven sampling. We recruited cisgender and transgender men who are 16 years of age or older and who reported sex with another man in the past 6 months. Participants completed computer-assisted surveys and biomedical testing. We're going to be presenting to you data from the baseline sample of ENGAGE. You'll see here that we have 2,449 participants, and here is the breakdown also by city. Our recruitment period was between February 2017 and August 2019. In the study I'll be presenting to you today, we examined the associations of depression and stimulant use with any syphilis, gonorrhea, or chlamydia diagnosis. Our outcome, STIs, was defined by positive antibody results from ENGAGE nurse-administered testing at baseline. Our correlates of STIs were depression, as assessed by the Hospital Anxiety and Depression Scale, a depression score as a continuous variable, as well as stimulant use and condomless anal sex, in the presence or absence thereof, in the past 6 months. For our statistical analyses, we fit a series of structural mediation models of the associations between depression, any stimulant use, which I'll be abbreviating as SU, which includes crystal methamphetamine, cocaine, and other stimulants used in the past 6 months, any condomless anal sex, or CAS, in the past 6 months, and bacterial STIs diagnosed at the study baseline visit. We estimated the indirect path from depression to bacterial STIs, testing a path from depression to stimulant use to CAS to STI diagnosis. For HIV-negative GBM, we also examined condomless anal sex while using PrEP. The structural mediation models were adjusted for age, ethnicity, income, city, and recruitment-related clustering, and were further stratified by participant HIV status. Here are our results. Each model that I'll be presenting to you here fit the data well with an RMSEA of less than 0.05. In our full sample, you'll see here our full sample had a mean age of 36.8 years and was about 71% white. In this full sample, depression symptom severity was associated with STIs in bivariate associations, but a pretty small effect, R squared of 0.003. However, in our modeling, we observed positive effects from depression to stimulant use, from stimulant use to condomless anal sex, and from condomless anal sex to STIs. This model accounted for 25% of the variance found in STIs. You can see here in this figure, where I'm showing you basically, we see an effect between depression and stimulant use, although smaller, between stimulant use and condomless anal sex, and between condomless anal sex and STIs. Here I'm presenting to you the findings on HIV-negative men. Among HIV-negative men, depression was not associated with STIs in bivariate simple direct associations. However, in our modeling, we observed positive effects from depression to stimulant use, from stimulant use to condomless anal sex, and from condomless anal sex to STIs. Among HIV-negative men, this accounted for about 16% of the variance in STIs. Among HIV-negative men who reported using PrEP in the past 6 months, we also found that depression was not associated with STIs in the bivariate associations, but in our modeling, we observed very similar as for just HIV-negative men in general. We observed positive effects from depression to stimulant use, from stimulant use to condomless anal sex, and from condomless anal sex to STIs. The model here accounted for 10% of the variance in STIs. For men living with HIV, depression was not associated with STIs in the bivariate associations, and the pathway from depression to substance use was not significant. What we did find, though, is that there still seems to be an indirect effect from depression. It's from depression to condomless anal sex, and then from condomless anal sex to STIs. And this model, although it did not include stimulant use, it was a model of depression to condomless anal sex to STIs, accounted for 30% of the variance in STIs. In summary, depression was correlated with a confirmed diagnosis of bacterial STIs, a pretty small effect though directly and only in the full sample, but a much larger indirect effect. These findings suggest that depression, a mental health variable, is associated with STIs partially because depression was associated with stimulant use for HIV-negative guys, and stimulant use with condomless anal sex, and condomless anal sex with bacterial STIs. For our HIV-positive guys, it was very similar, except there was no effect directly from depression to stimulant use. It was from depression to condomless anal sex to STIs. Our findings were similar for HIV-negative men regardless of whether we looked at condomless anal sex in general or whether they were engaging in condomless anal sex but were PrEP users. So although PrEP is associated with bacterial STI diagnoses, as we found and presented at previous CAR conferences, depression might not be deriving any relationship between PrEP use and STI incidence. We have several limitations of these data. These are baseline data, so we cannot determine causality. We need to examine if condomless anal sex was in the context of treatment as prevention. A lot of guys may be protecting themselves successfully against HIV, transmitting or contracting it, but they're still at risk for STIs. We also did not assess recent STI infection in this study. For future directions, we'd hope to address those limitations, as well as to examine what proportion of the variance in STIs is still accounted for by depression over time, because we do just have the baseline data. We'd also like to examine depression's association with individual STIs like syphilis, given the growing syphilis epidemic among gay and bisexual men. We'd also like to take a look at depression diagnosis and not only self-report scales. We have diagnosis of STIs, but here we're just using a scale of depression symptoms. In conclusion, these data suggest the importance of examining mechanisms by which depression might lead to STIs. Clinicians will still want to ask about depression, but its possible effects might be through its effect of increasing stimulant use and its effects on increasing condomless anal sex. To reduce STI incidence among GBM or gay and bisexual men, it might be necessary to address the social and psychosocial determinants of depression and stimulant use, to treat depression via evidence-based depression treatments like pharmacological and psychological treatments, and to treat depression and address stimulant-related risks might be especially important if we want to manage the growing STI epidemic among gay and bisexual men. I'd like to acknowledge our community organizations, the many community organizations we work with. At the top, on the bottom left, our university affiliations. On the bottom right, our funders. And of course, a big thank you to our engaged participants. Thank you very much.